Welcome to Lunch with Legacy Leaders, a weekly talk show with local and national thought leaders on issues impacting the Black community. Now introducing our host, Miss Anne Marie Sorrell.
Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch with Legacy Leaders. I am your host, Anne Marie Sorrell, President and CEO of the Mosaic Group. We are so excited to have you with us this afternoon and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Before we start our broadcast, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Broward Health, the Florida Lottery, and MiamiDade. If you have not checked out MiamiDade, check out this video. The weekend is upon us, so be sure to take your family this weekend to see MiamiDade. Now, today we are joined by someone who I think is very interesting, as he wears multiple hats, and we're going to introduce Dr. Todd Clark, who's professor of law at St. Thomas University, and he is the co-chair of the Center for Pandemics, Disasters, and Quarantine Research. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you very much for having me, Anne-Marie, and for that warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about some of the wonderful things that we have going on at St. Thomas through our Center for Pandemic, Disaster, and Quarantine Research. So I'm excited to be here and look forward to having a wonderful dialogue with you today.
Absolutely. So I'm going to just introduce you officially to our audience by reading your brief bio. So just bear with me for a moment and we're going to dive right into our discussion.
Wonderful.
Professor Clark joins as a tenured professor of law. He comes to us from the North Carolina Central University School of Law, where he was a tenured professor of law and taught business associations, contracts, corporate justice, employment discrimination, and hip hop. You got to talk more about that. Hip hop law and justice at NCCU. He also served on the ABA compliance team and was the director of the Justice in the Practice of Law certificate program and the director of new initiatives. Before that, Professor Clark was a lecturer in law at West Virginia University College of Law, where he taught legal writing and appellate advocacy. Professor Clark earned his BA in political science from Wittenberg University, his MBA from West Virginia University College of Business and Economics, and his JD from University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Following his graduation from law school, he practiced law at the law firm of Steptoe and Johnson. His scholarship includes a book, Corporate Justice, as well as numerous law review articles and other scholarship on social justice, corporate discretion, and sexual harassment. He is currently working on a casebook on sports law. Todd also serves as the co-chair of the Center for Pandemic Disasters and Quarantine Research. So welcome again, Todd.
Thank you.
So you have a pretty extensive background in law, of course. Tell us more about your background and your journey to becoming a law professor.
So that's a wonderful question. When I was in law school, I never envisioned that I would be a law professor, but I did love learning about the law. I love the discussion. I love the interaction. And when I graduated from law school, I started practicing at Steptoe and Johnson, and I really enjoyed my practice, but I felt that I was a bit constrained because I was really have a substantial intellectual curiosity, and I felt like the practice of law didn't allow me to explore that intellectual curiosity. And this is an interesting story because it shows the value of giving back. And so when I was in West Virginia practicing law, there were a couple of African American students that were in law school. They were first year law students. So I just voluntarily decided to help them with their legal writing. And so to make the director of legal writing invited me to take a position at the law school because she heard about the fact that I was helping. And that was my introduction to the practice of, my introduction to the Law School Academy.
Okay. Wow. So I also see that you're an author. So can you share with us more about your book, Corporate Justice? 1 second, Todd. I don't know. We lost your sound. We lost your sound. Um, Try again. Can you mute and maybe unmute? Okay. See if you can go out and come back in. Give us 1 moment. Just having a little technical difficulties for those who are following.
Does that sound better?
Yes.
Although on your end, it sounds like it's like really, really choppy when you speak. Do you think that's just the Wi-Fi here or what?
I am not sure. Am I still sounding choppy?
Yep, it's really choppy on my side.
Okay. I don't know because I can't hear myself to the audience. If someone is listening and can just put in the chat how we sound to you, that would be great. But we'll continue on because I can hear you now. Okay. Someone says sounds good. So I can hear you now. So we'll continue.
What may have happened is I got a call and I thought that for some reason, I guess the thing didn't block it. I have do not disturb, but the call came through. That might have been what happened.
Yeah, they're probably in your favorites or something.
Yeah, it was my mom calling.
Yep, that's why the call came through. That's okay.
Now you're very clear. I hear you very clearly now.
Okay, awesome. So we'll go back to telling us about your book, Corporate Justice.
Okay. So my corporate justice book was a book that I thought about writing. I teach corporations, and one of the things that happens in my corporations class, I talk about all of these issues about fiduciary duties and corporate finance. And one of the things I never really got a chance to explore because there was so much material in the corporations course was this notion of race, justice, inequality in the corporate boardroom. And so a good friend of mine, a guy by the name of Andre Cummings, we decided to write a corporate justice book where we could talk about these traditional corporate law contexts, but talk about issues of race, justice, and inequality, and how that influences the boardroom process. What are some of the dynamics that are added or are missing when you have diversity or a lack thereof in the boardroom? And so that's actually one of my favorite classes to teach because I get a chance to focus on core corporate law concepts, but I get people to think very critically about the issues of race, justice, and inequality. And this was a course that I created maybe about 8 to 10 years ago.
Wow. Well, it's interesting that you created that 8 to 10 years ago, but here we are in 2020, and we're dealing with on like levels of 1,000% more than a couple years back. We're dealing with issues of race and inequalities and justice. And so, and we're going to go into the pandemic as well, but how has this pandemic impacted, your students and your teaching style and even the sales of your book? Like how, and maybe even the resurgence of this book because it's so relevant right now.
One of the things that has happened is that there was like a perfect storm, right? We had the really sort of taking off of the Black Lives Matter movement at the same time that we had the pandemic. And I would say what has probably had the greatest impact is really the Black Lives Matter movement. One of the things that I do in that corporate justice class, there's a real interesting exercise that I put the students through. You might be quite surprised by some of their selections, but the short of it is we make them board members of a privatized prison, and then we give them a spending allocation. And so they spend money on reducing recidivism. They can improve the quality of the healthcare for the prisoners. They can spend money to lobby the gubernatorial candidate who wants to impose harsher sentences on immigrants, which will mean there will be more people in prison. They can give money back to the shareholders, or they can increase their own salaries. And so one of the things that's always interesting is when I created this course was at my former institution, or is an HBCU. And so you might think that though that students in general would make decisions that would endure to the benefit of prisoners, especially since we know that our justice system in many regards, in respects, is broken, especially at a school where you see a overwhelming majority of minority students. And one of the things that was so surprising and shocking to me and my co-author is that overwhelmingly made decisions to give money back to the shareholders and increase their salaries and did not spend much money to benefit the prisoners. And so we thought critically about why, right? So whereas professors, we think that we're doing this amazing thing in the classroom and talking about social justice. And sometimes what we found was this talking about it was not enough. So when I put the students in this exercise, and they were really proud of themselves, they were like, Professor Clark, I met my fiduciary duty. I did what I was supposed to do. And I really challenged them in that context, because I'm like, many of you are walking around and you complain about the things that the people are doing in the boardrooms and how they're not paying attention to your communities. And as soon as I gave you the power, you did the same things that you complain about. And so really what it was about was saying, you have a special role as a African American or as a woman. Be empowered. You don't have to hide who you are. And I think that what has happened when we see this Black Lives Matter movement, I think that it's been an empowering movement for people to say, you know what, this is who I am, and this is what I believe, and this is what I'm going to fight for. So I see a lot of value in that. And again, that's sort of coming out and occurring at the same time as the pandemic. I think that has also had an impact in terms of really bringing people together to a large extent, right? I think there has been some of that has occurred because the pandemic does not the pandemic or COVID doesn't necessarily discriminate, right?
Yeah. So I want to backtrack for a second. Your students' response, what was their response when you kind of pointed out that they were doing the same thing that they were complaining about, and that here it is, they had the power in their hands to really make a change and focus on the what was right for the prisoners?
Yep.
What was their response?
I'll tell you one of the more powerful moments in the class, and this answers your question. There was a gentleman, African-American male student, member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, very dynamic individual, extremely bright, one of our top students. And the other part that I didn't tell you about in that experiment, I told the students, whoever comes up with the best plan will get an extra credit point. And so the student said, well, Professor Clark, I had this fiduciary duty to my group to come up with the best plan in order to get that extra credit point. And I say to the student, and this was one of the sort of more powerful moments in the class, I said, if you will sell out for an extra credit point, imagine what you would do for $1. And it's silence. And I think that one of the things is, I wish I could read some of the comments, and the students were like, they're just amazing, like how the class really changed their life and got them to look at things a lot differently. And it's more about empowerment, right? Because you think that, oh, I believe in social justice and I believe in this, but when you get into a room and that's not the prominent voice, then that's when the real challenge. And I feel like that's my role as a law professor, to empower my students. And so I really work hard to get them to believe in themselves and to sort of exercise the judgment in a way that's consistent with their moral values and their moral compass. And you know, one of the things that my teacher says, Professor Cummings, is he makes a very powerful point that oftentimes when you see women and minorities that enter the boardroom, oftentimes they believe that they need to check their moral compass. And he says, how many times do you think that sort of, let's say, we know who overwhelmingly occupies the boardroom, white males, that's what the statistic tells us. How many times do they look in the mirror and say, I have to check my moral compass because this decision is or is inconsistent? So it's really about empowering. So it's like, why should you do that? Why should you stop being who you are and believing in the things that are important to you and your community?
No, I love that. And as a former college professor, I love the impact and the shaping that we're able to do to the minds of students and you know, these future generations and our future leaders. So kudos to you for making that work happen that you do every day with our students. Now, so we talked about the racial inequality side of it. Now we've had the pandemic, COVID, that has definitely disproportionately impacted our communities, for the number of cases, deaths, etc., and has just really shown all of the other health disparities that we've had, within our community. So, before we get into your current role, how has in the classroom your students been impacted? What are the conversations they're having around this pandemic?
That's a wonderful question. I mean, it's so challenging as a professor and a student during these times. I mean, you have no idea how many. It's really challenging for me. The email will start off, "Hey, Professor Clark, I'm sorry I'll be unable to attend class today because this particular family member is really sick. They're an elder family member, so I'm going to be unable to attend." And several times throughout the semester, I get the really challenging email and really unfortunate email that says that particular family member has passed, and I have to deal with this. And then as a professor and as a university, we do mental health is something that's really, really important to us at the university and my colleagues and administration at the law school. So we really work to step in to give the students whatever support they need, whether that's possibly postponing the exam, having consultations with the students to get them to healthcare professionals, just being a listening ear. I mean, I tell my students I'm available, at any time. Some of them will take me up on that. I joke around with them all the time, like I don't give hugs. I'll give you a kick in the butt, but they're like, "No, Professor Clark, you give hugs." And it's one of the things is not only do we have a community here, but we have a family here at St. Thomas, and so we really make an effort to make sure that everyone is getting the support that they need, because this has had a very challenging impact on the community, even in terms of the way that we administer exams. I mean, our exams are at the law school level are sort of highly, it's almost like taking an exam for the Secret Service. I mean, there's a high level of security, but with COVID you can't have live exams. So
Wow.
one of the things that's happening, we've had to administer all of our exams online, which is a major switch or transition in the law school community. So it has really had an impact. But the thing that I'm really proud to say is that our administration and our students have adapted. And I think that really starts with our president. Our president and administration really pushed and challenged us and said, we're not going to allow COVID to be an excuse to fail. We're going to use COVID as an opportunity to springboard to the next level. And really, that's what led to the creation of our Center for Pandemic, Disaster, and Quarantine Research.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Center for Pandemic, Disaster, and Quarantine Research. What exactly is it, and what does your role entail?
So the one of the things that we're doing with the center is that the center has pillars in terms of dealing with issues of health, data analytics, the law, and business. And so what we're seeking to do is related to those topics of pandemic, disaster, and quarantine, be a hub and a resource for providing resources to the community, providing information, and that's really what we are trying to do with the center. My role as the co-chair, I co-chair the center with my partner, Jose Rocha. We are the co-chairs of the center. We really handle the day-to-day operations, the logistical aspects, and then we work very closely with our executive director, Oliver Gilbert, who was also commissioner, wonderful gentleman, and he kind of oversees sort of the long-term vision and really works with us to put us into contact with the people that we need to contact or have relationships with in order to make the center grow.
Now, are you only focused on the Miami-Dade County area, or does your research and resources extend beyond that area?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the things Miami-Dade is near and dear to our hearts, and that is something that is very important to us. In fact, we recently received a $3 million grant from Miami-Dade County, which was just wonderful in terms of helping us sort of facilitate the aims and purposes of our center. But with that grant, we have been providing resources and services directly to Miami-Dade County. Now, the center overall is designed to really impact. We want to have an impact on the world. I mean, this is sort of our footprint because those things, pandemic, disasters, and quarantine, are things that happen regardless of the geographic barrier. So we want to have an imprint really on the world. But with respect to the recent grant that we've received, we have targeted programming and resources that we're offering to Miami-Dade County. And that's important to us because that's where we operate.
Yeah, and I was listening to someone say the other day that when you see one pandemic, there's probably another one right around the corner after it. And so, how do you believe that the center is going to be positioned, or will help position our communities to better prepare, better respond to potentially future pandemics?
So I can tell you this. One, we have Professor Rocha does a lot on the data analytics side. We also are really working with Florida Memorial in order to establish partnerships with them. In fact, we have one where they put together a survey for small businesses in the Miami-Dade County, and we're disseminating that. The thing that we really think critically about is how do we serve, right? How do we serve our community? Right now, a more immediate need for us is the Miami-Dade community. So let me just tell you about a couple of things that we have done in order to accomplish the goals, or accomplish what you asked in that question. We had an event earlier in the year called Innovation in the Time of COVID. And what we did was we brought business leaders and lawyers in a virtual event, and we talked about how can you use COVID in order to innovate, right? Like, there are some businesses that are thriving in COVID, and what are the secrets to their success? What are the things that those businesses are doing to thrive, and how can you incorporate those practices into your businesses? How will COVID impact you, and what is the information and resources that you need to do that? We're providing that information to the community. We just did a recent event, which was really excited about. It was called On to Prosperity, and it was really focused on helping small businesses. So we brought in someone to talk about the tax consequences that businesses are going to experience next tax season as a result of sort of receiving grants. And if they received the PPP money and it was forgiven, what are the tax consequences of that? I think a lot of people are going to have questions about that. It's going to impact a lot of our small businesses. In addition to that, we talked about other grant opportunities. There are a plethora of resources out there, and this is what's a bit frustrating for us and what we're fighting against. We worked very closely with the Chamber of Commerce, Eric Knowles, and Mayor Pagat to really get information out to small businesses. But in addition to the fact that there are resources out there, we're finding that many of our minority businesses are not taking advantage of those resources. So we believe that the information isn't disseminated. So we're really working to combat that. How do we get the information out into the hands of our businesses so they can take advantage of these opportunities to solidify their financial prospects? COVID. So we are constantly moving and shaking. We're constantly sort of revising and thinking critically about how we can make an impact in the community. I can tell you right now, I mean, I haven't worked this out yet, but one of the next things that I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do as a center is this vaccine is starting to take off, right? And we all know that, especially in minority communities can be very reluctant to be the first to jump in line to take the vaccine. What are the implications of that, and why is that, and how do we bridge the gap, and to really facilitate a discussion? So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to have that discussion before the end of the year. But we are really trying to keep our hand on the pulse of the pandemic, the pulse of our communities, in order to create programming that provides a benefit.
Awesome. Now, are there other centers like yours at other universities around the country, or are you guys one of the first?
So based on my research today, we are one of the first and the only. I would imagine that as the pandemic continues, I believe that other people are going to create those centers. But based on my research, we are the only center that is specifically doing the things that we are doing right now. We think that this is an excellent place, right? When you talk about disaster, just for the South Florida's experience with hurricanes and natural disasters. I mean, these are things that the South Florida community has experienced and a knowledge in dealing and addressing these types of concerns. And we think that we can be a resource and pull together those resources and information to impact the world and our local community.
No, that's pretty awesome. So how does our audience learn more about these efforts? How do they get involved, or how do they get help?
Wonderful. So we have a website. If they go to www.stu.edu/PDQ, that website contains information for articles that some of our professors have written that address many of the questions that people are going to have. It has links to some of the webinar events that we facilitated that provide a wealth of information with respect to the small business innovation in the time of COVID. We had another event, leadership in the time of COVID, where we had many of Miami-Dade counties in the city's wonderful leaders that came in and talked about their different philosophies and sort of goals and objectives during COVID. So we have that information that's available through the website. And then just other information that we're going to continue to update. Like we just posted something about another grant opportunity that's available for small businesses. So, I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is be a sort of a hub in this community, and then over the national and international community for these specific issues.
That is awesome. And then I know you've done a lot in your journey, and thank you for sharing your journey with us. So what about your previous experience do you think prepared you for this, if anything?
You know, I would say just from a really early age, I like to solve problems. I like to help people. And I think that sort of that initial just desire, right? Whether it's, helping people in a pandemic or helping people in a corporate justice class to understand that they have the ability to change the world. I mean, to serve as a change agent, to give people, empower people. And so I think it starts with that desire. When you're talking about specific level experience at my previous institution, I did a lot in terms of being at the forefront of creating programs. Like a lot of people have recently started utilizing Zoom platform. When I created we created a program called Justice in the Practice of Law, and I was one of the architects of that program. And all of the courses that we offered when I was at North Carolina Central were all online courses in a distance education format. We utilized online technology, and at some point we started using Zoom very early on, before people were doing this. There were many law schools that were like, no, you can't teach legal education online. And I'm like, no, you can. And I would have debates and argument. And now this is what we're doing it. So I think one of the things that's really important about any leader, I think a leader has to be able to see into the future. And if you think about really good leaders, they're able to do that. And that's something that I try to do. I try to look into the future. I don't think about now. I think about how things should be, and how can we get to that point? How do we take our position now to get to where we want to be in the future? And I think that's what's best prepared me for this position, because we have to constantly look forward.
I love that. And to build upon that, we like for our guests to leave our audience with a or a couple golden nuggets, especially as we, have all together battled through this year, and we're coming up to the end of the year. What's the takeaway, or what's a golden nugget that you would like to leave with our listeners?
The thing that I would like is the notion of support and passion. I think that this is a very challenging time for a lot of people, whether they're Black, white, male, female. And I think that at the end of the day, you have to have a heart of support. You have to have a foundation of love. And those things are really, really important to sort of propel and compel us forward. And I think that at the end of the day, it sounds very simple, but it's really true. And I mean, I've seen some amazing things happen during COVID. Really, I truly have, when, someone has been down or sick. And at that point, when you're sick and you feel horrible, it doesn't matter who the person is that's treating you. You want that support. And I think that that's something that's important, is that we really have to make sure that we support our fellow brothers and sisters.
No, that's such a great point, especially during these times. I think the holidays are going to be very different for people this year. And so whatever we can do to reach out and call, and I know we're tired of Zooming, but reach out and call and, do whatever is necessary. Now, how does someone follow you, Dr. Clark, or find you?
That's so funny. I've been so resistant to social media, but I have had to acquiesce in some ways. If you're looking to reach out to me, I would say maybe go to the law school webpage, and you can email me at tclark2@stu.edu. That's the best way to follow me. I do some other things in life, but I'm a pretty private person, so I don't have much of a social media presence, although I need to. But I would say the best way is email tclark2@stu.edu.
Awesome. Well, stay with us. We just have a couple of quick announcements for you. And thank you so much for joining us today on Lunch with Legacy Leaders.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. It has been. So next week, we will be joined by Terry Williams, who is the president and COO and owner of One United Bank, the largest Black-owned bank in the country. Also, remember to check out Miami Land on MIA Media Group, as well as look out for our upcoming issues. We have some exciting issues and exciting news coming in the new year. So stay tuned for that. And please remember to watch our weekly entertainment show, Soul. The show discusses art and culture, food, fashion, relationships, mental health, and more. Tune in every Wednesday at 7 p.m. with none other than Nikki Jellin. So please remember to share this video, mark your calendar, and tune in for our final show of the year next Thursday at noon. Thank you again, Dr. Clark, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.